Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to our next episode in this series. This is our Fireside Chat series, and as usual, I am your host, Leon Godwin. I'm your Principal Cloud Evangelist here at Cloud Direct. And I'm thrilled to be hosting this session because in the rapidly sort of world of AI that's constantly changing, there's lots of information that the non-profit sector are very much interested in. And to help us navigate that landscape, we are joined today by Kevin. Kevin works for Microsoft. He is an apps and infrastructure specialist at Microsoft, and we're going to guide you through some of the things that we see that are going on and some of the consideration points for non-profits in that sector. Now, we are experts in our field, so if you do have any questions, I would encourage you to post them into the chat, and at the end of the session, we will get to those. So I would encourage you to take this opportunity to go and get the insights from the expert and ask your questions. So let's jump straight in. So Kevin, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Leon. Thanks very much for having me today. I will just correct you slightly. It's Robert joining you today.
Sorry.
Kevin unfortunately couldn't make it today, but Kevin is my colleague. I've worked in Microsoft for the last 3 years supporting the non-for-profit team, and delighted to be here joining you today to discuss all things AI.
Excellent, and apologies for that. I was reading my notes.
Okay.
Okay, so AI, obviously, for non-profits is, I see a lot of interest in that space. And actually, the interest in AI from the non-profit sector is probably some of the greatest I've seen across sectors, but also their caution is probably greater than other sectors. So what are the sort of key things that you would say are the organizations in the non-profit sector they should think about before they start their AI journey?
Yeah, look, I agree. It's extremely topical with non-for-profits at the moment. They're looking to leverage it, wherever they can. But even, before we properly jump into it, I'm just going to say, there could be people joining the call today that are maybe a little bit skeptical of AI. A lot of our customers want to know, what's the art of the possible. And what I often point out to our non-for-profits is that people are using AI just even, perhaps by joining the call. If like myself, you're using a headset, I've noise suppression in this headset, which is AI. And I just know for a fact that if I'm sitting in a busy office and if that isn't actually switched on, I can hear multiple conversations. I can't focus on what's in front of me on the desk. So, AI is being used by people, possibly even they're not thinking about it. It's just there in the background, and it's making my life more convenient. Certainly when you're based in the office,
It's interesting you say that. I was reading a report the other day that the average person unknowingly interacts with AI 47 times a day. From when they wake up and they maybe use their laptop to go and do something, and there's AI. They're reading their emails, and there's AI used for filtering when they go to the cash print machine when they're driving to work, and you've got those blue cameras that you have on the motorway. There's AI powered there. So there's lots of AI is actually everywhere, but maybe not within that business context. So people don't actually see that level of interaction on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, exactly. And, obviously working for Microsoft, it's something that's very top of mind and topical for people. And, maybe there's a lot of thought about that this is a new product, or, because it's much more in the media and there's much more hype about it, if you like. But Microsoft has been working on AI, not just for a number of years, it's actually working on it for decades. And a lot of the stuff that Microsoft has worked on, themselves and indeed with partners, is around making things that make our life a little bit easier, to either develop a product that's going to work with us or for us. And, just going to maybe give you a couple of examples, and maybe for people that are joining, they may not be familiar with it, but we have an AI for Good labs in Microsoft. And, a couple of the things that they've been working on over the years that will resonate with some of the customers here is about using AI to help diagnose diseases early. Like assisting it with diagnosing cancer like quicker than say like a specialist or a consultant can do. And there's also, believe it or not, we're using AI to assist us with weather forecasting models, which again, if we can get a longer weather forecasting model, it actually helps our non-for-profits to actually plan for relief in certain areas that are maybe going to be affected by, either hurricanes, tornadoes, big wind events or heavy rain events. So I'd encourage people maybe after the call, if they want to look up AI for Good labs at Microsoft, because there's some really, really good use cases in there.
That's interesting. I actually did something similar about a year ago. I was looking at some of these resources, and I discovered that you were talking about the diagnosing diseases. There's a lot of public domain data sets that are available out there. So one of them was MRI data around tumours. And to us, we think of MRI as being sort of pictures, but actually, sort of behind the scenes, it's a complicated spreadsheet, effectively, of numbers that says the size, the shape, whether it's convex, and lots and lots and lots of different parameters. And within that data set, it said whether that tumor was malignant or benign. And so you take 80% of that data and you create a machine learning model, and then you give it the 20% without the answer, and then you ask it, what is this tumor, malignant or benign? And it only took 20 minutes to train. It's not a huge data set. It was only sort of about 1,000 records. But within 20 minutes, I managed to create a machine learning model that was accurate to 96% in 20 minutes. What would I have done with a larger data set? What would other organizations do? So it is profound, the impact that these things can have. So just touching on that sort of non-profit journey then, I like to think of AI as being like an engine, and that engine needs fuel, and that fuel is data. And that engine sits inside a vehicle, which is that infrastructure that supports that vehicle. What sort of key considerations should non-profits think about for that data and infrastructure side of things? Are there any sort of specific consideration points that you want to highlight?
Yeah, look, and maybe this isn't just relevant for non-for-profits. It can be used across the board for any customers at Microsoft. But AI, in the example that you gave there, with tumors and training, AI needs the data, right? So it's going to be absolutely no good to you whatsoever without data. So it thrives on it. Okay, so the more data that you feed it, the more accurate that it will become in your answers. And non-for-profits, I suppose, what they need to think about is who's going to be, where are you going to get the data from? Okay, so what data sets maybe are you using? Is the data clean? Is it prepared to be used in any of the large language models like you suggest? Where are you going to store the data? Who's going to access the data? Is there GDPR concerns on it? Where is that data going to reside? Is it going to reside in the cloud? Is it going to be something that you want to store locally? So if you're training your AI models, do you want it to only know the data that you're sharing, or do you also want it to pull in data from the web? Because that's going to pull in huge amounts of data. You're then going to have to think about costs, analysis of the data. So really, when you're, looking into your first steps of what you're going to do around AI, data is going to be the foundation that you need to build it on. So my main recommendation to you would be to make sure that your data is clean, and know what requirements maybe are on you as a non-for-profit in terms of accessing it and storing it, and that you want to maintain as much control of that as possible. And that's what I'm seeing anyway with customers that I speak to.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'm seeing lots of organizations that are starting to see their data as like one of their primary assets, and actually going through that process of saying, okay, well, let's bring this data together, because historically they've kind of treated data almost as silos. This is payroll data, this is sales data, this is CRM data, whatever, and they're in these kind of separate silos. But if we're kind of asking AI to say, can you do something that is going to be impactful to my organization, then data in silos isn't going to have that impact. Unifying that data and making sure it's of the right quality, consistency, it's timely, and it has that kind of, and you go through that process of making sure, the old adage, rubbish in, rubbish out. It is going through that process of making sure your data is clean. I mean, even just something simple like, once upon a time we used to have file servers, and we used to have like the same document with a different version number on it. Now we use SharePoint, and it's all got version control sort of built into it. But actually feeding in loads of documentation of the same document at different levels of maturity doesn't make any sense. You would just use the sort of final version of it. And so going through that sort of hygiene is a really important step. So given your comments around that sort of digital plumbing, that sort of data hygiene, are there any other sort of key Microsoft AI apps and services that might be relevant to this sector?
Yes, in short, there's a huge number of services, that are relevant. Obviously, the main thing that I'd like to talk about today would be around Azure, but also, we're seeing a lot of our customers that are maybe using services outside of Azure, like maybe Copilot. Like that's probably one of the most common things the customers are using AI for, in terms of meetings, summarizing notes, helping them if they can't join a meeting, or if they have two meetings going on at the same time, that they don't actually feel like that they've missed out, because they can see the summary, they can get any follow-ups and actions from that. Within Azure itself, you have, I'm going to say, like a plethora of services. Okay, you have the likes of speech services, computer vision, there's OpenAI, there's language, there's machine learning. And again, maybe to give an example that will resonate with some of our non-for-profits here, we have created a service called Seeing AI. And the Seeing AI app is helping blind people to actually, I'm going to say, like to scan a room, or to scan a barcode of a device to find out what it is. It's scanning people to say who this person is, and that's syncing back with their own contacts and images that they have on their phone. So that, please, again, look it up. It's called the Seeing AI app. And it's a really pertinent use case for people that, are obviously struggling to see their surroundings. And this gives them an audio description to make people feel, a little bit more comfortable, especially if they're going into a new environment.
I'm a big fan of agents. I spend a lot of my time playing around with agents. So Copilot for me, I would only really personally, because I've got a slightly unusual role, I would use the Teams functionality quite extensively, but I wouldn't integrate. I wouldn't be using some of the other functionality. I would have other AI tools that I would use. But then I started with the release of sort of agents. In fact, I made a video on this a couple of days ago, the research agent, where I just said, go and have a look at all my communication channels. Go and identify all the things that I've got upcoming, things that are outstanding, and any work that I've delegated to other people. And that research agent was fantastic. It went away, examined Yammer and email and Teams and channels, and pulled in all my different data points and all my sort of conversational ways of interfacing with people, analyzed it, ranked everything, gave me that summary, and then gave me a plan. It says, right, well, Kim, she's done everything she's said she's going to do, but Jake's still outstanding. And this week you should focus on these. This is your priority order for things coming up. And I use that at least once a week to help me prioritize and focus. And by looking at everything, it gives me that insight and focus of what I need to do. So in this sort of buy end of the spectrum, versus build. Those agents, I think, are very useful for a lot of organizations to help accelerate their individual workflows. I'm also kind of passionate about the build end of things, because you talked about some of those services in Azure. So even this morning I was in AI Foundry looking at sort of the model catalog, and that's one of the great things I think about Azure, and your ability to be able to consume different AI models for different tasks are insane. There's, if you go to certain other, there are other providers out there that will have, some models, but the volume of models they have is just tiny compared with those that are available from Microsoft. And of course, Microsoft make their own models with their sort of Phi series of models as well, which I'm a big fan of. So yeah, I would agree. Those infrastructure side of things are really, really powerful, and they can. It's kind of like, okay, what are my use cases for my organization? The technology is that kind of enabler,
Yeah.
But what difference is it going to make specifically in a specific non-profit? So how would you talk about the process that a non-profit should go for to make sure, if they are going to do any AI type initiatives, that it's actually going to drive meaningful value?
Yeah, and this is going to sound maybe like a generic answer, right? But it is going to be very much dependent on the nonprofits themselves, okay, what they want to get out of it. But it's interesting when you talk about, creating an agent, and again, it's something that I'll encourage people on the call to do. We can arrange, like you setting up your own agent, for example, in a 30-minute session, in partnership here. We are being encouraged internally to create our own agents. So like, I can create and call it, say, like an Azure agent, and I can use that to help me maybe monitor what services a customer is using and what they aren't. For example, I could use it to see if customers have MFA switched on. I can use it to see if they have any support offerings from Microsoft directly. And I can also use it to help me, believe it or not, with sales forecasting. So I can train that agent again with previous data, and I can ask it questions and treat it as a colleague, really. Which again, if you're a non-for-profit, for example, you could be using the likes of Power Apps or Power Automate or something like that. So we've like low-code platforms that allow like a non-technical user to incorporate AI into their workflows. And we do that by having pre-built models for them. So that there's an option for a pre-built model, or there's an option to customize your own model. And you can use that, like you can get a kind of a guided experience from your Microsoft contact if you wish. And then there's also probably non-for-profits that are using maybe Dynamics 365. And they're looking to see what are their donor relationships like, what's their volunteering been, does it decrease or increase in a certain month? Is there any fundraising insights that they can garner from the data that they have? And that can be particularly valuable, especially if they see that there's a drop off in donations from a certain organization, or like if there's people, for example, that are fundraising themselves, running marathons or things like that, like how did that compare to the previous year? And all of this can be done, again, on the data that you're going to be sharing with it from your organization. So it's using your data, and the more data that you give it, the better the accuracy that you're going to get. And just before I pass back to Liam, I'll give you an example of something that I was trying to use, because sometimes you will make mistakes when you're playing around with AI initially. And I was asking my AI agent to run an analysis on a pivot table. And I must have spent nearly an hour trying all different ways of asking it queries and questions, and it was just giving me back absolute gibberish, to be honest with you. And I then asked some of my colleagues internally, and they were saying, look, the agent that I was trying to use isn't actually set up for working particularly well with pivot tables. So, I needed to change the data that I was feeding into it. So I had to put my hands up there, and having made a mistake, but it's just giving it the data so that it can give you back the answers that you need, as opposed to something that didn't make sense to me.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think of it like AI, like a toolbox. Like, what's the best tool? Well, it depends on what's the job in hand. When it comes to that adoption space, I like to think of this AI, especially in non-profits, very much as like a team sport, because you can go around. I think it's important that people can understand what does AI excel at? What are its baseline capabilities? It can write code, automate stuff. You can ideate with it. You could write blogs with it. There's a bunch of sort of, if you like, baseline set of capabilities. I think in that team sport, getting everyone to know what its baseline capabilities are, and then sort of elevating that with those kind of, what are the generic use cases? In the marketing team, it can go and do this. For an IT team, it could go and do that. And then I because I'm so keen that AI is a team sport and it's about bringing people on that journey, once they understand what it's good at and what some of the use cases are, actually ask them to go back to their own departments and consider what are the use cases that are going to be relevant to their organizations, their specific workflows. Because the workflows, the business process with an organization, it's like DNA, it's unique. And understanding that sort of foundational stuff, and then going away and thinking, does that mean I could do this, and this? That's going to save loads of times. This is burning lots of my time and effort, or my team's time and effort. And then bringing all those different use cases that are contextualized within that non-profit's business, and then just ranking them, just turning around and saying, is this going to be high effort but low reward, or is this going to be low effort and high reward? And getting that kind of community input from your organization to assess which use cases are going to be the most beneficial, I think it's a really good foundational step. And I think it also helps address some of the cultural concerns that people have in terms of AI adoption when they're part of the process. You bring people along the journey.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you there in terms of, maybe come back to one of the points that I made at the start. People are using AI even before they know it, but maybe they have a perception in their head that AI is going to, for example, like take their job, or that AI is going to make maybe their role, a little bit redundant or something like that. But we're definitely been told to use it in a partnership approach, okay, and to work with it. And the scary thing is initially just like, what are we going to do with it? What is our use case, right? And you maybe spend time planning around how can we leverage AI, and in that time, maybe 3 months passes, maybe 6 months passes. Then there's huge new changes in AI, and before you know it, you could be 12 months behind the curve, just because you haven't actually started to, I am going to use the term, to play around with it. And because it's by using it that you become more familiar, that you actually say, well, actually, if I can, for example, train it to do X, Y, Z task, I'm going to give you some examples here of just even some notes that I've taken down in the research ahead of this call, which maybe people don't associate with AI. Sustainability, right? So a lot of orgs, including Microsoft, will have sustainability goals that they'll need to hit. And people will say, like, well, actually, AI is, generating more electricity usage in companies, across the globe. How can I become more sustainable if I'm using AI? But we have sustainability AI for farming, for example, okay, which is showing farmers how they can reduce their CO2 emissions, for example, or their carbon emissions by using AI. What other use cases do we have for charities, like fraud prevention? Has any non-for-profit here had any kind of cyber attack or hack? There's some famous stories that have been in the news recently that I, don't need to name. But if you look over the last 6, 12, 18 months, there's been massive cases of hacks that have happened and fraud that AI can actively assist you in preventing from a security perspective. And look, I know we'll touch on security, as we go through. What about customer service? How can AI improve customer service in a non-for-profit? Are people ringing up to donate money if you're advertising on TV, or if you have a big annual event, and then when they're logging a call, they can't actually get through to make a donation, or they're waiting 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then they're dropping. How can AI improve the service for the customer there to ensure that you get all the fundraising that you need? So they're just kind of some of the examples that I can think of. And I see actually there's a couple of questions, Leon, in the chat. I don't know if you want to leave those till the end, or if you want to kind of address them as we go. I'm easy either way.
Well, I think I'm quite happy to sort of freestyle it as we go. So what are the most common mistakes you've seen charities make when trying AI so far? That's a really good question. What have you seen, Robert, not Kevin?
Yes. What I've seen is maybe on occasion some customers trying to do it themselves. Like they'll maybe have an internal think tank or session, and again they'll come back to like, what can we do here? What's the art of the possible? And I'm going to say, like at Microsoft, and indeed our partners in Cloud Direct, we're doing this multiple times a day with multiple different orgs. So I would certainly encourage that, even if it's early days in the conversation, that that you should have either a Microsoft or a partner, like Cloud Direct, who is doing this like literally as part of their bread and butter, as part of the conversation. Because if you start using AI yourselves, and even the example that I gave earlier in the call, I was using it incorrectly, because it was just it was an agent, if you like, that I wasn't familiar with. Maybe needed some more training myself. But when I asked a colleague who was more of an expert in that particular field than I was, I was able to understand, well, look, I'm just using it wrong. But if I was to give feedback to my management about, was that AI tool useful to you? My initial thoughts, if I was by myself, would have been no, it was absolutely no good. But it was genuinely just I was using it incorrectly. So I would encourage speaking to partners, speaking to the likes of Microsoft, but also probably the best use cases that you're going to get are going to be from non-for-profits that are covering the same or similar areas that you do. Right. So if you're maybe a library or a museum, you're going to have a different focus from if you're a mental health charity, or if you're a cancer charity, or if you're a charity that's working with children. They all have little specialist sections and areas that we can assist them with, because we've seen others doing it. So we may have hundreds, or if not hundreds, we may have tens of examples of cases that other non-for-profits in your sector are using already, and leverage that. There's no harm in asking us a question. What kind of guidance or advice would we give? We're very happy to give you a steer.
Yeah, I would echo that point in terms of that community side of things. Non-profits are much better at it, I think, than sort of private sector organisations. There is a wealth of knowledge and activities that are going on, and actually taking a community. So we did a call recently with Tree Hall, who heads up charity IT leaders, and actually bringing people together so they can actually share their experiences, or maybe actually do things. Here is a journey I'm going on, let's do it together. It might be separate organizations, but the learnings and the process may be very similar. So actually taking a sort of cross non-profit approach, I think, is a very good idea. Other common mistakes I've seen organizations make is they haven't considered the overall benefit and the best approach on how to do it. It would be, I don't want to use this analogy, but I'm going to anyhow. It's like a toddler driving a car sometimes. It is, you've not done the preparation steps, first of all. Play around with things, absolutely, but actually think about, okay, if I'm going to be spending donors' money, it needs to be, and that actually leads on to another question. It needs to be measurable in terms of the output that it offers. So one of the questions from the audience is, how can we measure the ROI of AI projects, especially when our impact isn't always financial? I have some views on that, but Robert, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, look, it can be difficult to quantify the kind of tangible benefit that you get from AI. Okay, and we can share the likes of maybe global reports that are released by different governments or different large scale businesses, if you like, to see, like that there may be a time benefit for people. Okay, so if you're freeing up, let's just say an hour a day, for example, of people's time by them not having to do extra research, like what can that individual then focus on outside of that? Can they then spend time on a different maybe transformation, or if they're working in IT, can they spend time on looking at saving in resources or optimizing? Does it allow them to do additional fundraising efforts? But there are formulas, right? And we do have, because there's obviously a lot of different products, right? In Azure specifically, if I can take that as an example, and we can give a specific formula for developing the return on investment for AI, similar to the way that we can do it for cloud transformation, if you like. So that there is plenty of ROI tooling, and if there's a product specific that you'd like to come to me afterwards to say, like, look, what's the ROI for, if you like, for Copilot users, or what's the ROI for machine learning, I can look into that in more detail. But it is a little bit more tricky than just, if you like, the standard hardware versus cloud approach.
Yeah, I think one of the things I like to keep things sort of as simple as I can, and for me, if you're going to do anything, it has to satisfy at least one of the better, faster, or cheaper. And if it isn't ticking one of those, it probably isn't an exercise that's worth investing in, because each one of those you can actually put a KPI against. You can turn around and say, better. Are we getting better customer experience? Is that something we can survey and we can measure? Are staff happier? Or is it quicker? Are my workflows end to end? If I have an invoice coming in, and the internal processes it has to go through in terms of it comes in, we need to find what project code and what nominal code, and only someone else knows it, or it needs to be split between different projects and ultimately be keyed into some system. That workflow can take us X amount of time. And I've seen lots of organizations that are very post-it orientated. It gets printed, posted, left on someone's desk. Whereas you can automate that with sort of an AI enable that. You can use things like AI Builder. But that means that workflow now, instead of maybe taking hours, is taking minutes. And you can actually, that's measurable. There is a specific, I can do something faster. So if I'm not spending all my time doing this, then I'm freed up to do higher value work. And so, yeah, my advice would be, think about the specific metrics you can use to quantify better, faster, and cheaper. And when you view something through those lenses, it's like the SMART objectives, be specific and make it measurable. And if you can say, right, my intent is to do this, my expected outcome is this, I've now done it, my actual outcome was this, is that going to be a better outcome than I originally thought?
Yeah.
Go on.
Just if I may, just one or two final points on it, because I'm just conscious that maybe we haven't given a straightforward yes or no answer that we can measure ROI in such a way, right? But there are customers that are running trials themselves, say, like, where they give, and I'm just picking IT as a function here, but you can pick finance or anything else that you want, where they have 5 resources set up to do a project that they believe will take them a month, for example, using no AI tools. And then they give the different individuals, but as part of the same team, the same project, and they give them AI tools to use. Is it the case that they can then do that in 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Are their results more favorable than the team that didn't use AI? So there's kind of before and after testing to see, like if you've actually gotten value from the AI, because if you're going to be spending, whether it's $50 a month or, $5,000 or $10,000 a month using AI, you need to ensure that there is an ROI there, because if not, you'll likely get use of it for a short time and then your company will switch it off, and that's no good to yourselves, and it's certainly no good to the likes of Microsoft. So we need to help you to prove that AI is going to be worthwhile your investment. So hopefully that covers that question off.
Absolutely. There's another question which I think I might field this, which is this is about funding, and if there was a particular project or a POC, what funding is available. That's a relatively simple one to answer. If you qualify, Microsoft have various funding programs available. And what Cloud Direct do is we will very, very quickly be able to say whether you qualify, and B, we can go and apply to Microsoft. There's a portal that we go and use. The answer comes back very quickly, and you can get that very quick ready reckoner to say, here is something I would like to do. We ask Microsoft, will you fund some of that cost of change? And Microsoft will come back and say, yes, we will fund to X value. And so it's a relatively simple process, and we can turn it around quite quickly. So there are specific innovation funding pots that Microsoft make available for these things. We actually at Cloud Direct, we actually have a specific accelerator program where we take a proof of concept, and it's like a 3-week timeline where we take a proof of concept, we work with you, we ideate, and we build out, we design, and we implement within a 3-week period. That's another sort of process. So there is lots of help out there. You are not alone. And I'll circle back to other ways in which I could help. Just touching on the financial side of things, are there any, just going back to our conversation, are there any specific cost optimization things that we don't want non-profits to experience bill shock? Are there any specific controls and processes that non-profits should consider as they start consuming AI?
Yeah, look, absolutely, and it's not a once-off either, Leon. I'll be very honest with you. Especially from an Azure perspective, it's something that needs to be ongoing. So you're talking about right sizing the compute, leveraging serverless architecture, data. Okay, we've talked about data a lot today. If you're not optimizing your data storage, that is going to help you with a high bill. Yep. All right, so you need to ensure that you're choosing correct tiering, so that if you're putting terabytes or petabytes of data into the cloud that you're looking to analyze, is that something that you need analysis from straight away? Can it be stored in something with maybe access to in 30 days rather than in 30 seconds? And you'd need to have that set up so that it's automated, right? So that you're not manually doing this. You can set up budgeting tools in Azure. So, if you have a certain budget for a month, if it's, let's just pick a figure, if it's 10K per month that you're spending in Azure, you can set off a control that you get alerted once you reach that spend. And you can also then leverage things like reservations, savings plans, Azure hybrid benefits. So if you have some server licenses, you could be eligible for hybrid benefit to look to reduce cost. And then there may be times, and again, we might touch on security before we finish, depending on time. If there's things that you don't need on 24/7, don't have them on 24/7. All right. So there would be some steps, but we can share steps with optimization and with cost savings, but that's typically something that most customers would look at least on a monthly basis, depending on their staffing levels and spend, but definitely quarterly. And that's something that Microsoft is happy to work with our customers on managing.
So what are One of the things I've noticed when it comes to using AI, not all AI models are equal, and you pay to use them. But actually, selecting the right model for your specific needs. So one of the areas I'm a big fan on, especially for early adopters and early use cases, is automating a business process. So I gave an example of an invoice process a moment ago. If you actually break down every single one of those steps into like a process diagram and say, what step would AI need to do? So an email comes in. The first question is that email relevant to accounts, and does it contain an invoice? There is a decision point there that a human would make, and we make it in our inbox without even thinking. We do it every day. But you could offload that to an AI just to simply classify, should this qualify, should it not? If I think about that as a human being, I could ask a 10-year-old to go and do that, and they're going to be able to get that task right. In other words, the level of intelligence I don't need a really expensive OpenAI frontier model. I can actually use a relatively simple, cost-effective model to go and use that. And when you start breaking down business processes into their individual steps and say, what level of intelligence is actually needed for this step, you can optimize your cost by not actually using these state-of-the-art models to go and do things, rather, one of the things you can buy credits for AI Builder, and after your first procurement of credits is a relatively large jump. You go from like 10,000 to 1 million credits is with your first purchase. But actually, maybe as your OpenAI, maybe you only need 20,000 credits. You don't need there'll be a lot of wastage there. Actually, using OpenAI and a pay-per-view kind of model would actually be better. So I think understanding where your spend is going and is it on the most appropriate things and are there better ways of doing it might be useful. We'll take one more question before I do want to touch on that security that you just mentioned. But one more question from the audience is, what are a realistic first project for non-profits, whether it be a project or POC, that would demonstrate value quickly? And what have you seen work well?
Okay, it's going to depend again on the actual non-for-profit space, but like to maybe give you some examples. If you're working with volunteers, like if they're constantly coming to either your maybe support team or they're having to come to your website for answers, a chatbot. So chatbot for volunteers, using maybe natural language to get 80 or 90% of the questions resolved without them actually having to talk to somebody. And that could be a quick win. In terms of, I'm just having a quick look, like maybe around using machine learning for donor insights, to understand why have people donated to you in the first instance, and then maybe how you can retain them. If that's a priority for your org, if you've seen any kind of a drop off in donation numbers, they would be two fairly quick and simple ones to set up. But I think I'm happy to, you can reach out to me after the call if you like. Happy to see what would be most suitable for your own type of organization, if you wish.
So one of the things I offer is I offer a free of charge workshop for organizations where they bring their business context and challenges and questions, and I'll workshop through. And within that workshop, one of the things I've done is I've kind of looked at common use cases. I've kind of mapped them onto that sort of Gartner Magic Quadrant in terms of time and complexity. So there are some, the bottom left-hand corner is where I would encourage most people to start. Don't try to boil the ocean. Start with things that are achievable, that don't require profound levels of effort. It's a journey. It's not a sprint. And to start off with the use cases that are measurable, achievable, that the value, and aren't going to take a huge amount of time and investment, so you can understand. I think because part of doing things simply to begin with, I think helps overcome some of those adoption barriers, because this is new technology. Once upon a time we used to use typewriters. Now we use Microsoft Word. There is a change. There is a change into the way that we work. And I think understanding those use cases is really good. I think also I would look at business process automation, and I'd also look at those Copilot agents. I think those are particularly valuable. I'm less so Microsoft Copilot because of the nature of my role. A lot of my role isn't terribly repetitive. It tends to be kind of unique every time, but actually going through and having agents that can do some things for me and automate some of my life in terms of a personal accelerator, I find useful. I also would encourage people to look at their departmental use cases and where it can work, or have a workshop with me, or both, where we can actually explore your use cases. So just going back to that security side of things, Robert, is there any specific advice when it comes to AI, data, and security that you'd like to let the audience understand?
Yeah, sure. Like from our perspective, and it's driven home a lot at Microsoft these days, is that security is number one. It's really a non-negotiable. And we've launched our Secure Future Initiative program there over the last 12 months or so. And certainly when it comes to dealing with anything around your data or a user's data or a donor's data, and anything that's highly confidential, we need to look at a few steps, the likes of encryption, who can access it, so identity and access management, what kind of threats are maybe you face or have faced in the past, and using prevention services, to mention products, if you like, the likes of Defender for Cloud or Defender for Servers, Microsoft Sentinel. Okay, all of these things can be looked at. Firewall, what are you looking, how's your network security group set up? Best practices can be shared by Microsoft, obviously, in discussions around that. But things that maybe people don't consider is around responsible AI practices and principles, and how that's going to work for them. And just ensuring that whatever data that you put up isn't vulnerable to an attack. All right, that kind of sounds like it's a no-brainer. But if the data that you're working with and if the tooling that you're working with isn't secure, it's not going to be a successful outcome for you or indeed, Microsoft. So security would be probably up there with actually having your data clean and ready to go as the two top priorities and focus, from my perspective. And I just want to, if you like, quickly touch on, there's one or two questions that I think I can answer very quickly for AI and funding and credits. Microsoft is just coming into its new fiscal year, July 1st. And typically, a lot of our programs for funding can change. So if there's any new programs available or any new workshops or funding that Microsoft can do, we'll certainly, make them known. So I check in with your Microsoft rep or your Cloud Direct rep, if you like, in early July. And access to that funding, once approved, is almost instantaneous. So if we approve a POC, it should mean that you'll have little to no payment whatsoever. And if you're working with Cloud Direct, that actually they would be billing us, and we would be covering the bill on our side. So the customer for anything like that probably shouldn't have any PO to be raised, etc. But each project would be unique and need to be looked at.
Yeah, and we'll do an update shortly, sort of towards the end of July. We tend to push out a funding update in terms of the change to the program. So any new rules that have changed, and obviously AI has been a significant, it wasn't as big a thing on the landscape, say 2 years ago, and the funding programs changed that kind and adapt to those landscapes. So we'll push out a webinar and an update on any changes to those funding programs towards the end of July. Just going back onto that security thing, the only other thing I would say is, I bet you in the audience, I bet you've used ChatGPT. People in your organization have put time and effort in building a tenancy that is secure and has the rules and protections to look after data. Try to avoid using and pushing your data to third-party systems. There's an excellent model called DeepSeek R1. It's a very, very good model, but it pretty much means shipping your data out to China. Possibly not the best thing to do for your organization. So try to do everything inside your established security boundary. Microsoft provides you a vast playground. There are tools that you might think are very, very good that you want to use, and you can bring them inside your boundary rather than sending your data outside to use those tools. Just bring the tools in. So that would be my other sort of security takeaway. Just try to do everything within inside your established boundary. Okay. One last question, I think, before we run out of time. Slightly off topic, but relates to a comment made earlier. Our charity is very mindful of climate change and our responsibility to minimize the carbon footprint. I asked Copilot about the energy costs of using AI, and it said it was about 10 to 100 times more energy intensive than normal search. However, Microsoft aims to go carbon neutral this year for our data centers, and this carbon negative, and then be carbon negative in the future. Consequently, what would you say about using Microsoft AI tools?
I'm going to finish that sentence. Maybe that does not really, add up from a sustainability perspective. I think maybe is the end of it. But feel free to type in the end of that sentence, whoever asked that question. Yeah, look, I mean, one of the things that I've seen, it kind of drives me a little bit nuts. There was a craze there over maybe 3 or 4 months ago of people creating, these Barbie doll images of themselves, and the amount of compute that was using. I think that Sam Altman actually came out at one stage and asked people to stop doing it. And I'm going to say again, this is just my own personal view. I mean, all the tools and resources that we can access, in Microsoft, probably the last thing that I want to be doing is creating an image of a doll of myself that I know is going to generate, I'm going to say like a load of carbon, okay, to add what value to, my working or daily life. But people got on board, and, it actually got a little bit more buzz and hype around AI. I know that there's also conversations, again at a very high level around Microsoft and maybe other data centers accessing nuclear power and things like that. And some of the recent reports that I've said is that, AI and data center compute is somewhere around 11 to 15% of usage. Different countries are at different levels, right? But the thoughts are that possibly within the next 12 months, that AI will actually be responsible for 20% of electricity use in each country or region, right? Which is a huge number. So Microsoft and the other big data center providers had to go, looking at other routes to see how they could make that, I'm going to say, like, from a sustainability footprint, they had to look and see what can they do around maybe wind power, solar power as well. But the reality of it was that maybe nuclear power was going to be one of the least carbon emitting options to power what's going to be there. And I think in the UK, they've just kind of signed off something like a 14 billion spend on, is it Sizewell C, that nuclear plant. So nuclear, a lot of people were against it, over the years. And as it's become, say, that bit safer and it's going to be a reliable source of power. I think that's how Microsoft and other providers are actually going to meet their goals, is by using nuclear. So that's it's a change in the way that people and companies are buying their electricity. But it seems to be that the nuclear option is going to answer the carbon call, if you like. But I'm happy for that individual, happy to go into that in more detail. I don't profess to be a sustainability expert, but I know that we do have a lot of expertise in that area. And actually, one of my customers that I manage looks after the carbon footprint emissions from each customer in each city globally. So I'm happy to maybe put you in touch with them as well for some insights. But it is complex and probably way above my pay grade and understanding. But that's just my own thoughts. I'm on it.
Speaking of above your pay grade, I'm going to quote I'm not going to ruin the quote from your chief exec. He was saying, when it comes to climate change, we have a large number of problems and we need to come up with solutions, but we are running out of time to come up with those solutions. So we need to be able to do like 100 years of research in 10 years to be able to help address and reverse some of the effects of climate change. And AI is one of the primary vehicles to go and do that, because we need those accelerators now to be able to solve the problems for the future, because just human endeavor will not lead to a significantly fast enough change to be able to address it. So whilst your question was very specific in terms of search and what have you, I think I look at it more holistically in terms of what is the benefits that AI is going to have for mankind. And I think that is a very specific example of how its ability to do research and its ability to research 100 times faster than a human being to come up with new technologies and methods to help combat climate change. I think that's the sort of lens I look through slightly more holistically. Well, we have covered a lot there, Robert. So thank you. Apologies at the top of the call for getting your name wrong. I did do a quick search and replace. So I know we were originally going to do this with your colleagues. So apologies for that. I'm going to give you a chance for a final thought, that anything you might want to cover off before I close things down.
Yeah, look, and I'll just also maybe just add to that sustainability question, look, given that there was a little bit of a follow-up there just in terms of the overall impact that, changes that Microsoft is making is having. Like in the past, and I'm not going that far back, right? But I'm even going to the time maybe when I was in university, and if I needed something, I needed to maybe jump in the car. I needed to maybe drive 10, 20, 30 miles, whatever it was, to the nearest library. Then when I was there, I probably needed to use some compute power in there. I was probably using lighting and heating power in the library when I went there. And, to be able to just get an answer with the click of your finger or the click of a button, obviously there's a massive convenience there, but it is going to come at a cost from a carbon footprint. And as these AI tools become more sustainable, and like we can see the likes of NVIDIA are working on newer models that are going to be more powerful and say like fully water cooled, for example, so if they're just sitting in tepid water, that they're not going to actually overheat. So I do think that in the next few years there's going to be massive change in that, and that's no doubt going to help us to meet our carbon goals. But there is a commitment there for Microsoft to, I think, meet it by 2030, and I actually think we're ahead of that at the moment. I think we might be on track to do it in late 28 or early 29. So that is really positive, even with the changes that are happening. But I'd say, look, maybe as a final point from me, if there's anybody thinking about AI or thinking, how can we use it? What can we use? Again, one of the questions was, we've maybe done a POC, but now we don't know maybe how to get it into production. So, if you're doing some testing and trialing, whatever testing and trialing that you're doing needs to show you results and needs to have a successful outcome in order for you to go into deployment. So, if you're able to show that it's going to save time, cost, money, or, help you to move faster as a non-for-profit, they're the kind of things that we'd be saying that you need to be ticking those boxes before you go into production and deployment. So just just try it out, and try it out with the help of somebody is probably my final point. Don't be trying to do it alone, because you likely won't get the value that you need. That's
yeah, and on that point, I'm just going to finish up and say thank the audience for their time and their very insightful questions. I do offer a free of charge workshop. Bring your problem. We'll discuss the art of the possible. You bring your business contacts, and we'll spend an hour or two just exploring how you and your organization might specifically benefit from data and AI initiatives. So I want to thank you, Robert. Very much appreciate your time and your insights. And good luck, everyone. Have a wonderful day. And I will see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Take care.